I'm
Hi.
here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, David Ng. And together we are the co artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective that produces intersectional and intergenerational film and artwork from underrepresented communities of color. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we are gathered here today from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Part of our work as labor activists and artists, as queer artists on unceded territories, means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back. Hot Pot Talks emerged during the pandemic from our collaborations with the Lim Association in Chinatown, historically a neighborhood of Chinese railroad laborers who were brought to settle Indigenous territories as part of the ongoing colonial project.
And we're really excited to be hosting this special edition of Hot Pot Talks as a part of the Mayworks Festival of Working People and the Arts, which is hosted by the Union Cooperative Initiative. The Mayworks Festival celebrates diverse artists and working people at the intersection of art, social justice, and labor. The festival will bring together artists and workers from a diverse range of organizations in the visual and media arts, community arts councils, cooperatives, and labor to celebrate the rich history of workers and labor unions in British Columbia. Check out mayworksbc.ca for the full schedule of events running May 1st to the 14th. So today we are really excited to be joined by Kyla Yin. Kyla Yin James is an illustrator and tattoo artist currently based in Montreal, whose work is inspired by mythology, the unconscious, subcultures, speculative fiction, and history. Their work is filled with symbolism that creates surreal and speculative scenes questioning the status quo. Through their work, Kyla dissects and reassembles how they approach the different thought worlds they grew up in. They describe their practice as thinking and feeling out loud, sorting through the symbols and ideas they've encountered. Welcome, Kyla.
Hi, so happy to be here. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
So Kyla, why don't you get us started? Tell us where you're joining from today. And maybe I always find that when somebody else reads out my bio, I'm like, oh, I guess I did submit that. Oh, I guess I did write that. But I always feel like I always want to create an opportunity for the artist to share a little bit more just from their own words. So tell us a little bit about you and where you're joining from.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm coming in today from Tiohtià:ke, colonially known as Montreal, currently where I'm based. Um, I feel like the bio covers a lot. I what would I add to it? What would I add? I feel like I think the bio's fine.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, you're an artist. I'm curious what made you decide to become an artist?
That's a good question. For me, I've always drawn. I think that's a pretty classic answer, but I've always drawn, and it was just something that was so natural to me that I didn't even think of it as a career option until maybe when I was 15 or something. You know, you hit that age where you feel a little bit like you have to start thinking of these things. And when I started thinking about that, I started thinking, okay, well, what can I see myself doing for, potentially the rest of my life? What can I see myself doing like that consistently? Drawing was the pretty natural answer because I just realized, oh, I'm doing this all the time. I'm doodling. Oh, something just almost fell there, but it's all good. Um, and the doodling, that'll art classes, it transitioned to where I am now.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, I think at age 15 and as teenagers, that is often, yeah, I think that's often where either we stop all kind of creative pursuits because I think as artists, we all kind of understand that as little, children, creativity is kind of just I think we take that for granted, right? It's just sort of everywhere. It's just how we live our life. But then schooling, and I think the system, and just kind of a natural part of growing up is that creativity gets kind of extracted out of you because we have to conform to society and all these other, other kind of systems. So I'm curious at 15, if you could just tell us a little bit more about that. You're like, okay, so this is something that you're really serious about. Did you experience any kind of setbacks, like from, your family or the people around you in terms of that support system or support network?
Um, for me, I think in many ways I was lucky. My mom she had a skeptical approach, but she also had a practical approach that I do appreciate in hindsight. I remember when I told her, because my first thing was at first I wanted to be a fashion designer. I saw Alexander McQueen and Vivienne Westwood as a kid, and I was like, wow, I want to do that. And then I tried sewing and I hated sewing. So I kind of realized, okay, I like the drawing. I don't love this sewing thing. So that was the end of that. Um, but anyways, when I told my mom I wanted to be an artist, her first response, one of her first responses was, okay, well, how are you gonna feed yourself with this?
Right.
Yeah.
How is this gonna earn money?
Mm.
I think a pretty classic Chinese mom thing to
Mhm.
say,
Yeah.
but also a good question to ask.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that both helped and hindered in a way because there was a very there was definitely heavy encouragement for me to choose graphic design, which I did end up studying, but I had to study it and do it to realize that it's not actually what I wanted to
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
Well, I wonder, Kyla, if we can talk a little bit about the design that you did for the windows that are going to come up pretty
Yeah,
soon.
definitely.
Yeah, and so maybe just a little bit of background. First of all, I want us to just tell you again, this is such a stunning illustration. It's so
Thank you
beautiful.
so much.
Yeah, and I just so just a little bit of context for our audience. So the Mayworks Festival, as I mentioned in our intro, is a festival that focuses on labor organizing and working people and artists. And one of the things that we wanted to do to celebrate uh, during Mayworks, and it also because May 1st is also the start of Asian and Pacific Islander Month, and so we wanted to think about the intersections of labor organizing and race, and also because our studio is in Chinatown, we wanted to think about history, but also living history and futurities around Chinese labor organizing, but also in the ways that it intersects with other social justice movements. So I mean, in short, we gave Kyla sort of a little brief about some of the really vibrant histories of solidarity building in the neighborhood, and also in different cultural groups in Vancouver, and also in the rest of the country. Yeah, Kyla, do you want to just maybe talk a little bit, tell us about your inspiration behind it, and tell us about your art?
Yeah, definitely. So the title that I chose for this piece is Transmigration, which is a synonym for reincarnation. And the reason I chose that is because when I received this information about the history of labor organizing and, its current iteration, I started thinking about how, yeah, definitely it's a common phrase to hear, but history repeats itself. And
Mhm.
so I thought of it as different lifetimes in a sense, like different iterations. And also I liked the word transmigration because migration, diaspora, I wanted to give a nod to that history too.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the reason I went with the Qilin, but in, the solar punk form is the Qilin's a very iconic mythological historical figure in Chinese visual language. And I really like solar punk because, I think when we think about science fiction, when we think about imaginings of the future, it's very often dystopian. There's a lot of dystopian science fiction out there. Um, there is a lot of like utopian stuff too, but I feel like in pop culture, at least, the dystopian stuff just like gets made into movies more often
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, where I wanted to take this is that what was I gonna say? This idea of nature and technology being able to coexist together, this
Mm.
harmony that I
Mhm.
think is part of the that's like part of the union organizing is like I remember you were saying there's like this ecological aspect to it too that I wanted to bring in.
Yeah, and for me, and this is why I thought this was such an exciting idea, is because, oftentimes, we think about the history of organizing, but also it's a living history that
Mhm.
also continues into the future. Oftentimes, yeah, and so it really excited me that thinking along the lines of like imagining, futurity. Um,
Well,
yeah,
I
no,
think also too the what I appreciate, and I think more and more people, and even corporations are recognizing the importance of art and artists, especially post pandemic, and just at the rate of how much we consume art now. Of course, there's
Mhm.
challenges and problems tied to the consumption of art and the like associations of mass producing our art, that sort of thing. But what I appreciate about what art and artists can bring is the kind of creativity and the lens through which we can reimagine what perhaps was a historically white or homogenous way of organizing around labor, for example, right? Where artists can actually bring in their creativity. So I really love that you invoked and drew inspiration from solar punk. And what I love about the solar punk movement too is that it is integrating all these different mediums and genres, drawing from art and literature, science fiction, ecology, like all these different kind of movements and disciplines and industries to create something that is us thinking about futurity, which is the antithesis to steampunk and the dystopian or even utopian, which is often framed in a very culty kind of like way, right? So I really appreciate kind of your visioning around this and marrying that with the mythological kind of creature that is present in the illustration. So thank you.
No
um,
problem. Thank you guys for, I mean,
mhm.
letting me have a lot of free reign in this. It was
Mhm.
delightful.
I mean, it's super on brand also, just
Yeah.
because David and I are this is kind of super up our alley. For a while there, we were kind of experimenting with the Huli Jing mythological character and what that means of the like feminization, but also the queering of the like fox and the fox spirit with nine tails, like
Mhm.
so like these kinds of common, creature tales, some of it quite like horror based is very, very exciting and thrilling for us to think about. David, you had a
Yeah,
thought.
no, I'm curious because this is linked. I wanted to ask you because this is in your bio, and I should note to our viewers, if you hear snoring, it's because I have two dogs right next to me. But I read in your bio, Kyla, that you were drawn to, what was it? Thinking about sort of uh, imagery that you grew up with. So I'm curious, why did you choose the Keelan? I've seen some of your other work. It's also evokes some of this type of mythology. Yeah, I'm curious what was why did you choose the Keelan? And yeah, tell me a little bit more about that inspiration for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I feel like mythology is very powerful. It's a very foundational building block of pretty much any culture's storytelling tradition,
Mhm.
has roots in legends, mythology, all these different things that kids kind of learn growing up. And I think what draws me to mythology is because growing up, growing up, I didn't necessarily have a ton of exposure to Chinese literature. You know, like I can speak Mandarin, but I unfortunately can't really read or write very well. Like, definitely not enough to access that kind of material. But what was huge for me growing up was, for some reason, when I was 5, when I went to visit my relatives in China, they just really wanted to show me Journey to the West. They just thought, "Kyla has to see this. Kyla's gonna think this is great." And I
That's
did.
amazing.
I love Journey to the West. It is such a influential
Mhm.
thing to me. It's like, I think seeing the Journey to the West cartoon, the 1998 cartoon,
Mm,
that might have been a turning point for me wanting to draw, because it drew me in. And I think where I'm going with this is that, I think of Journey to the West, it's almost a type of mythology in itself. It's so foundational in Chinese culture. So many values are passed along and displayed through the story, I
Mhm.
feel. And yeah.
Well, it's really, yeah, it's interesting because it's also full of characters within the journey itself,
Oh
which
wait, sorry, one sec. Did I properly answer your question? I feel like I did not even talk about the Tulin. I just talked
no,
about
That's okay.
no, no, no. I was curious about your inspiration to the mythology. So yeah, no, thank you. But if you want to tell us about the inspiration to
Mhm.
the Qilin, please, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Tulin is relatively simple. I mean,
Mhm.
I really just wanted to have an auspicious symbol on the building, bring some good luck in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So Kyla, I'm gonna kind of steer us into a different topic. So you recently moved to Montreal.
Mhm.
How has that been like?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I moved to Montreal end of October 2021. That was an interesting time to move because in end of December and January, so just a couple of months after I had moved, there was a curfew with COVID, with all that stuff going on. After that, things have been good. I think after I've been here, what, a year and a half now, I feel like I feel a bit more grounded here now. I feel like before, definitely, I never knew what was going on. I just would let people and friends drag me to things, and I would just let them deal with directions and anything, and yeah.
Yeah, I would love to actually get your insight. Obviously, a year and a half is not, I don't know if that's enough of a, data entry for a long-term qualitative kind of assessment by any means. But I think as artists, whether we're in music or otherwise, we all have understood or have heard at least the kind of differences in the cultural landscape of Montreal versus Toronto versus, here in Vancouver. And Montreal, up until, very recently, and by recently, I mean like pre-pandemic, had been very affordable for working artists, for just, people that wanted to kind of explore. There's more room, there's more affordability, there's certainly more encouragement there. It's kind of nestled culturally for a lot of artists, right? This is why so many artists move out to Montreal, and this has been for decades. Now, I'm curious if things have changed, and I mean, certainly with the affordability issue, right? That housing issue is a global phenomenon. I'm curious if you have any insights, having had the experience as a working and professional artist in Vancouver, and now that you're in Montreal, what are some of your insights there?
Definitely. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I moved to Montreal at a very good time, despite the
Oh, okay.
whole having to go through a lockdown. But the thing is, definitely, because I remember looking at apartment prices when I was moving there, And then even recently when I thought I had to move, when I was looking at prices or sometimes, just Facebook housing groups, those posts will just pop up on my feed. I'll just look at them. And the prices, it's like the prices in Montreal now are pretty much prices in Vancouver
Oh, wow.
Wow.
2019 Vancouver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not Vancouver right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was still pretty bad in 2019, but
It's
now it's just
mhm,
totally, it's
yeah.
wild. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely in Montreal, rent is getting up there.
Mhm.
But luckily in Montreal, I think there is a lot more municipal legislation that favors tenants.
Mhm.
Mm,
Because here every year when you renew the lease, the landlord does have the option of increasing the rent. But as a tenant, you also have the option of refusing, and
Oh.
they can't evict you for refusing.
oh, wow.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you can refuse it, and most likely what happens is you discuss it with the landlord and you figure out a fair amount. What's
Mhm.
also nice is that the régie here, like they're kind of the overseeing body of housing, at least rentals. Every year they publish what they consider a fair amount for an increase, and it's a
Mhm.
Mm.
percentage, and it's divided based on how houses are heated, things like that.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so you can use that as reference to see if your rent increase is within reason or not.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. It's
Yeah,
I'm
like
also, yeah,
Carfax for housing.
for housing. Yeah.
it kind of is. It's really nice. It was a very pleasant surprise when I moved
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Um, I think being an artist in Montreal, definitely because it's generally more affordable, I feel there's less, how do I describe it? There is less pressure in some
Mhm.
sense. I feel like in Montreal, if you make things, you don't feel like every single thing has to be consequential
Right.
because you don't need every single thing to work in order to put food on the table.
Mhm.
Mm.
But also, if you hear random noises behind me, that's just my rabbit doing her
Aw.
thing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that's a big difference, I think, in Montreal and Vancouver. Just Montreal is able to have a more relaxed attitude
Mhm.
to art
Mhm.
Yeah.
making. And I think that relaxed attitude also allows more people to be artists because
Yeah.
more people, they feel less of almost less of a some type of barrier in a way.
Right.
There's less barrier to entry.
Mhm.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, Kyla, we had a conversation a couple weeks ago around just like even culturally, the differences in Vancouver and Montreal. I was sharing one of my biggest, I guess, like culture shocks when I moved to South Africa was I just didn't realize that the only vegetables, like 90%, 99% of the vegetables that I consume are Chinese vegetables. And in a place like Cape Town, and this was 11 years ago, now it's gotten a little bit better. I was there last year and I was like, oh my God, there's like three different Chinese vegetables in the supermarkets there now. But at the time, it was like, I was joking with Jen, although it was true. I was like, how do I cook Swiss char? Right? I was like, it's just not something that's in, that was in my diet at the time. And so definitely, for me, I really took for granted how like Chinese culture is kind of really like the norm almost here, where
Mhm.
even if you go to like a quote unquote Western supermarket like Superstore or Price Mart or something like that, you'll have like a robust, Chinese grocery section. Yeah, I'm curious how has that been in Montreal, and how was your experience?
That was definitely also a culture shock for me. Well, I mean, I moved to Montreal pretty impulsively just because my partner got a contract and I was freelancing. So I just thought, hey, yeah, let's go. Sure, let's do it. Um, so I had no idea what to expect. I didn't look anything up about Montreal. I just showed up. Um, but I think one of the main culture shocks is the francophone aspect.
Mhm.
Is
Yeah.
I think a lot more French than people think it is if you just visit. But and then the other shock was definitely so when I first moved here, I moved to an area called Plateau, which I would kind of equate to something like Mount Pleasant, Main
Ooh.
Street vibes in Vancouver. I feel like
Mhm.
in Montreal, a lot of neighborhoods have their Vancouver equivalent and
Mhm.
Right.
vice
Mhm.
versa. You know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
there's a lot of Vancouver folks living here, and
Yeah.
yeah, we're out here making those comparisons.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, definitely. Because the thing is, I grew up in Edmonton, and I feel like even in Edmonton, part of Western Canada, there's definitely still a very integrated in that
Yeah.
sense, similar to Vancouver, integrated, like especially Chinese population. I could go to a Safeway in
Yeah.
Edmonton and
Yeah.
find pretty much any ingredient that I need. Yeah, maybe I need to go to TNT, but most things are just going to be there. But then I come to Montreal. I go to a supermarket. I can't find rice noodles. I have a
Oh,
mini
no.
crisis.
I love rice noodles.
I
I
just
would
I
not be
just
able to survive without rice noodles.
I just took it for granted that I
Yeah.
just thought every supermarket had
Yeah.
vermicelli.
Yeah.
You know, I just thought
Yeah.
that was just there.
Oh, that's funny.
For me also, it's the soya sauce because in Cape Town there was soya sauce, but there's one type, and it's the type that's not like light. It's not light enough. It's not light.
Mm,
It's not light soy sauce. It's just that sort of generic kind of in the middle brand,
yeah.
and that annoyed me so much.
Mhm. Well,
There's
so
those yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, David.
No, no.
I know we can talk about food like forever and
Yeah.
always. This is why we make all of our arts around
I
food.
mean, that's why it's called Hot Pot Talks, I'm
hundred
sure.
Exactly.
percent, 100%. But Kyla, tell us maybe a little bit about like your community there and your friends there, and like, are they mostly artists? Like, what kind of communities, intersectional or otherwise, are you a part of there? I'm sure you're also in the process of building a community. So, but yeah, I would love to learn more about what sorts of conversation is happening within artist circles, perhaps within BIPOC artist circles, et cetera, and do like a compare and contrast with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so far in Montreal, I've mainly engaged with like definitely a lot of other East Asian and Southeast Asian artists here. That's like the main groups that I've connected with so far.
Mhm.
Montreal has, I think in many ways, Montreal is more diverse than Vancouver. I feel like Vancouver, yes, there are a lot of East Asians, but you don't necessarily see a lot representation of other folks. But Montreal, it's like the spread is different. Definitely, the spread is different. Um, I think in Montreal, the like event organizing around Asian artists, queer Asian artists is, how do I describe it? I think there's definitely a few groups doing things. It doesn't it's somehow hmm, I don't know how to put it. Established? No, established is not the
Hmm.
right word. It's definitely been there and is there,
Mhm.
but I think yes, what I'm trying to say is that it feels different because there aren't as many
Hmm.
Asians as
Mhm.
there are
Right.
in Vancouver. So it definitely feels different. It definitely feels, um, yeah, it definitely feels different in
Do
that
Hmm.
sense.
you, but does that, like, do you feel like you then stick out more as a result of being an even more minority there?
Hmm. I feel like maybe that's a tough question for me to answer because right now I live very close to Chinatown.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
feel all right in that sense. And also at my work, like at the tattoo studio that I work at, it's entirely East Asian owned. So
Hmm.
I also feel just very a part of that. I think definitely so far in Montreal, I've been able to find bubbles and
Yeah.
feel very feel very like at home in those bubbles. But
Yeah.
I think there are definitely times though when I'll go to, maybe a music show or something, and I do realize, oh yeah, Montreal is pretty white.
Pretty yeah. Yeah. I don't know if this is tangentially related, but it's in it what I found. I have had so I'm dog sitting for a friend right now, and I've had these really nice moments, and this is just off of Commercial Drive, so I think I would argue I think it's still a predominantly white neighborhood, but I've had these really nice moments. So as I'm walking these two Stafford Terriers, quite a few times, like Chinese elders, which this never happens to me, have stopped me to talk, have stopped to talk to me
On
and asked
Commercial
me,
Drive?
yeah, yeah, or
Wow.
around the neighborhood. And this never happens to me, and I feel like it's a moment of kind of what we're referring to, of like when you see your people and they kind of want to they want to know and connect. So I've had that happen actually a couple times, even this morning. I had a really nice moment to this woman. Unfortunately, I don't speak Toisan, even though that's my quite a bit of my family's mother tongue. But it was really nice. We had a quick little chat. I had no idea what she said, but she was very friendly and wanted to know more about the dogs. But
That's
I'm
so
curious.
funny
Yeah,
because we were talking about how
yeah,
I very rarely get stopped by Chinese elders, unless it's through like a work kind of space or
right.
environment where there is that professional kind of working relationship, or other kind of like Asian artists, elderly Asian artists. But like on the streets or at like a supermarket, I often get, what I get is quite a bit of a judgment, especially my hair, because it doesn't conform
Mm.
to their expectations of what a
Yeah.
proper lady should look like. That being said, every once in a while, once a blue moon, one or two would are who are just as bad, like who are rebellious in their own right, or who don't care about that stuff, will go out of their way to be like, hey, I love your hair, and kind of share that deliberately with me. And so it's very interesting to see the kinds of responses my hair kind of
Mm,
gets from Chinese elders. It's quite a funny, yeah, it's quite funny actually.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Just
think oh, sorry, were you gonna say
no, no, no.
something?
I was just gonna throw it back to you, Kyla. But go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say that something I've noticed I've never had happen to me in Vancouver that I've only had happen to me in Montreal is when I was in Vancouver and I speak Mandarin to someone, no one bats an eye. They just think, "Oh, yeah, yeah, okay, Wasian speaking Mandarin, cool. That's yeah, we've seen this before." But in Montreal, people are shook. People do not know what to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What sorts of like stereotyping and assumptions that you experience then?
I mean, what seems to happen to me a lot in Montreal, at least when I talk to other Chinese people, when I bring out the Mandarin, is a lot of them will just look at me and say, "Oh, but you don't look Chinese."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I don't quite understand why that's something they need to say, but
Hmm. How do you
all right.
normally respond to that? If you,
Um, Honestly, I just generally shrug it off and let it go because, what conversation am I gonna get out of that? Like,
Mhm.
there's no I don't think there's much of a productive conversation. Um,
Yeah.
I think in Montreal, because there is more of like a Latinx population here, I
Mm.
have been mistaken for Latinx a few times.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, like, to the point where I learned, because people would come up to me and be like, "Habla español," and so I just learned how to say, "No, lo siento." It's the least I can do is just be able to say, "Sorry, no."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got the wrong person for that.
Yeah, language is
Yeah.
so funny that way. Language and
Mhm.
the kind of like visual recognition of your presumed ethnicity or race, connecting that
Yeah.
with language is really fascinating.
Yeah, I've
Mhm.
been thinking about that a lot because so we didn't mention this in our intro, but Hot Pot Talks grew out of this collaboration that we've been doing with the Lim Association. So the Lim Sai Hor Khao Mok Benevolent Association. It's basically a group of a family clan of Chinese elders in Chinatown. And I think oftentimes, I mean, when Jen and I have we've been working with them for 3 or 4 years, but it took a while to build that trust because
Mhm.
my Cantonese is terrible, and also that and there's, I think for them, I've noticed just a bit a curiosity around and an intrigue, I guess, around why young people, although Jen and I are not that young anymore, but of the younger generation is interested in collaborating with them and learning about the history. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so it's been a really interesting experience.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I think in Montreal in that sense, maybe well, I mean, I think there's definitely a history in Montreal's Chinatown of there used to be a lot more infighting.
Mhm.
But
Between like Chinese elders or just between
yeah, like different
Oh
different
wow.
family like, different like clan associations,
Yeah.
things like
I
that.
mean, probably globally,
Yeah, yeah.
everywhere.
There was
Can you
definitely
can you imagine a
sorry.
reality show?
No, I mean, so funny.
the
I think
It'd be
real the
so
real
good.
family, yeah.
we should
the
make this reality show. We should
Real
make
the
this
re-
family
documentary.
associations
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Chinatown.
yeah,
Chinatown. Yeah.
totally,
It'd be
totally.
good.
We
There'd
Oh
be
could.
a
my God, you
lot.
heard it here, folks, first. We're
Um,
making a claim.
but I think in Montreal's Chinatown, because in recent years it's been in more active danger of being, run over by development and gentrification. I think in that sense, like I think that active danger has been very good at bringing people
Mhm,
together who care
Yeah.
about Chinatown, and that includes the elders who I think elders and also other people in that community who want young people to get involved, like want young people to also care about the space because I think it's a pretty classic thing where families who start in Chinatown or they grow up in Chinatown,
Yeah.
the kids end up leaving to,
Yeah.
move to other
totally.
parts of the city or and then lose that connection.
Yeah. I wonder, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. I'm in school right now. So and I'm sure this has been written about because I'm curious about how, it's Chinatowns everywhere in on Turtle Island in North America. Everywhere are kind of um there's a lot of socio-political tensions around what you're mentioning, Kyla, around gentrification and development. But it feels like to me, Chinatown, like those tensions, those class struggles, those racial struggles are like a microcosm of like the city. Because it's not because people get really impassioned also about Chinatown politics as well.
Mhm.
And it feels to me, and again, I'm sure someone has already written about this, but it feels to me like it's a microcosm of a lot of the the big fights, the big sort of political, social, political like tensions that are brewing all over the city in Vancouver. But it's sort of like it's really being interfaced or brought like really heightened in Chinatown, just because, um, yeah, because it's Chinatown. Yeah, it's an interesting because I see this in Edmonton. We've talked
Mhm,
to the Aya Collective. I think there's folks also in Montreal. Like I know like Karen Tam in Montreal has been doing
Mhm,
a lot of
mhm.
work on that as well. Yeah, it's an interesting organizing frontier, if you will.
mhm.
Yeah,
Definitely. I think you've got all the archetypes
Yep,
in Chinatown.
yep,
yeah,
100%.
Mhm.
And
yeah,
like dialed to like 100.
yeah.
Yeah, because of the passion. Because definitely, I think Montreal in particular, Chinatown isn't only the space for Chinese diaspora, Chinese populations. It's there's a lot of Vietnamese grocery stores in
Mm,
Montreal's Chinatown, and I think a lot of different groups find some sense of safety
Mhm,
in Chinatown.
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
I love it. Other organizations have been doing a lot of work around this, but thinking about Chinatowns, even in Vancouver, it wasn't just a place of Chinese people. Of course, it's on an unceded and indigenous territory. It's right next to the downtown east side. Yeah, it's sort of what Jen and I have been thinking about a lot in our work, actually, with the community projects working group, which is hosting your window.
Mhm,
Mhm.
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, and in some ways, like, depending on, what the work is and who we're engaging with, a lot of times Dave and I wanna talk through and think about, like, decentering Chineseness and Chinese culture, Chinese, people in the work that we do, because that
Yeah.
is often, the more front and center, is given more platform, there's more, um, in
Yeah.
general. And so it's an act of almost resistance and subversion to kind of
Yeah.
decenter that voice and, allow more room for other voices within the
Yeah.
diaspora to emerge. Mm.
Yeah, it's sort of why, a lot of the discourse around anti-Asian racism, and Jen and I did quite a bit of work trying to unpack this over the past couple years, because and Jen, I'm thinking about the exhibit that we did with Jay,
Mm.
our friend Jay Caballo, who's Filipinx. And we had long conversations, because when we made Yellow Peril Queer Destiny, the film, we talked about queer Asian futures, but the story is about Kendall, who's Chinese. And but yeah, and so when we went, and this conversations around anti-Asian racism, well, who are we talking about, right? Because
Mhm.
and there's a lot of talk about anti-Asian racism, the surge of anti-Asian racism, but for a lot, for working class folks, for the Atlanta shootings, for sex workers, that type of anti-Asian violence has always been there. um but now that it was happening to, or being directed to Chinese people, it started taking on a different energy. And so I don't know where I'm going with this, but it was sort of like, it's been a thing that we've been thinking quite a bit about, even with Hot Pot Talks. Yeah,
Definitely, definitely.
yeah,
Well, on that note, I think it's time to ask our favorite question.
yes.
Okay.
In the We often end the conversation with a question to our guests, which is, and it's my favorite question, what is your favorite hot pot ingredient and why?
Ooh. Ooh, I think for me, like what do you call that? I think it's the tofu skin, the doupi.
Yes.
I love them. I
Yes.
I love the
Yeah.
transformation that it goes through. It starts like crispy and
Yeah.
thin, and then it
Yeah,
goes in, and it's almost like this noodle with its own texture, but it soaks up all the
It's
hot
so
pot.
good.
so
Yeah,
good.
it's
Jen, you
Mhm.
also
you
my
introduced you introduced me to it, and I'm totally
I
obsessed.
did?
Yeah, it's so good.
Mhm. It's my favorite thing, definitely, like, by far.
It's 'cause
Yeah,
you can fry it, or sometimes it comes already
Mhm.
fried.
the
Yeah,
fried one is my
the
favorite.
fried one.
Yeah,
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 same.
yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kyla. It was so nice to have you on Hot Pot Talks. And
No
for
problem.
folks,
Thanks for having me. This was a fun conversation.
yeah, and for folks who are checking out Mayworks, the window display will be up during Mayworks at in Chinatown at our studio at 525 Carroll. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.